You've probably heard the phrase selling your soul. I mean, usually it brings up images of a midnight crossroads, a stormy night, and a contract signed in blood.
Right, like an old movie trope.
Exactly. But the stack of behavioral science research and neurological studies we're unpacking today takes this ancient mystical myth and, well, drags it right into the modern boardroom.
Yeah, the sources reveal that selling out isn't just some dramatic metaphor for a bad career choice.
No, it's actually a measurable structural shift in the human brain. And for anyone listening to this deep dive right now who has ever felt that subtle, creeping pressure to trade your core values for external success.
Whether that's a promotion, securing venture capital, or just a desperate sense of job security.
Right. This is your roadmap. We are going to examine the heavy cognitive and biological toll of that trade, and more importantly, how you build the actual leverage to refuse it. So, okay, let's unpack this.
To understand why this bargain is so destructive on a biological level, we first have to look at the behavioral science of how it operates in modern environments. The texts we're looking at define the starting point of this process as the extrinsic takeover.
The extrinsic takeover.
Yeah, it's a fundamental restructuring of your motivational systems. A person begins with primary intrinsic drives. So this is the natural curiosity you have for a subject, a passion for the craft itself, or just a deep desire for internal ethical alignment.
Sure, the stuff that makes you actually want to do the work.
Exactly. But the takeover happens when those internal drivers are systematically dismantled and replaced entirely by an external scoreboard.
But wait, if I'm trading my intrinsic drive for something else, what exactly is replacing it? I mean, people don't just wake up one morning, decide to be empty vessels, and walk into the office.
No, of course not. The system has to offer a highly compelling substitute to initiate that takeover. The substitute is usually a hyper-quantifiable metric of success. It's money, social prestige, the corner office, or, on the flip side, the sheer terror of falling behind and facing punishment.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Your internal compass, the biological mechanism that tells you what is inherently meaningful or ethical, it gets overridden by whatever the outside world is rewarding with dopamine at that exact moment. You stop asking if the work is good, and you just start asking if it'll get rewarded.
That makes me think of, like, structural metal fatigue in an airplane wing.
Yeah.
It completely changes how we should view moral compromise.
How so?
Well, you don't have one massive, catastrophic blow that snaps the wing in half. Instead, it's the result of thousands of tiny, invisible micro-stresses during routine flights. The sources refer to this as the erosion of non-negotiables.
Oh, that's a perfect analogy.
Yeah, it's not one big villainous decision to abandon your morals. It's the microscopic stress fractures. It's fudging one metric on a quarterly report to keep an anxious client happy, then next month massaging the data a little bit more.
You are imperceptibly shifting the baseline of your own humanity. And the danger of those micro-stresses is how they encourage you to commodify yourself.
Right, treating yourself like an asset.
Exactly. You stop viewing your time, your energy, and your moral stances as the foundational, untouchable elements of your identity. You start viewing them merely as leverageable assets to be traded on the open market.
You tell yourself that you are just trading a small fraction of your integrity for a specific bonus. You're basically treating your own ethics as a transactional currency.
What's fascinating here is how this transactional mindset inevitably leads to a psychological state the research calls authenticity as a mask.
Authenticity as a mask.
Right. Because you are making these daily compromises, the human mind cannot tolerate the friction of being fully present during the act. So you learn to bifurcate yourself. You separate who you are from what you do.
You build a work avatar, a version of you that exists purely to interface with the corporate machine and secure those external rewards.
Precisely. Constructing a highly curated, fabricated persona.
While the actual you, your genuine values, your authentic reactions, your empathy, gets shoved into a dark closet for 8 to 10 hours a day. You wear the mask because the mask is the thing cashing the checks.
But here is the paradox that really jumps out from these sources. If the external rewards, status, wealth, security are so universally desired, why doesn't this strategy actually work?
Yeah, why aren't the people who successfully put on the mask and get the massive payouts just walking around in a state of euphoric bliss?
Right. If corporate environments are essentially designed to incentivize this behavior, why does operating within that ecosystem detonate our own mental health?
Because the human operating system fundamentally rejects the lie, right?
Yes, and it does so on a neurological level. We often talk about cognitive dissonance as if it's just a fleeting, uncomfortable feeling of guilt.
Like a mild discomfort.
But the neurological data in our sources shows a much more violent reality.
Right.
When your actions consistently violate your core beliefs, the anterior cingulate cortex.
That's the part of the brain responsible for conflict monitoring.
Exactly. It detects a massive discrepancy. And it perceives this moral incongruence, not just as an abstract problem, but as a literal threat to survival.
Wait, really? The brain registers faking it as a biological threat.
It absolutely does. Faking alignment triggers the amygdala's threat response. Your brain starts pumping cortisol, the stress hormone, right into your system.
So you are sitting at a desk typing an email that compromises your values, and your biology is reacting as if you're being stalked by a predator.
Yes. Simultaneously, because you are suppressing your true values, you are depriving your brain of the dopamine rewards that come from intrinsic satisfaction.
High cortisol and starved dopamine receptors.
It is a state of chronic, measurable, physiological stress. And you can't just let an alarm bell ring in your head forever. The biology forces a resolution.
Right. You either have to change your actions or change your beliefs.
You abandon the Faustian bargain, which means forfeiting the external reward, the money, the status, or you change your internal beliefs to match the corrupted actions.
Which usually manifests as deep cynicism, emotional numbing, or just total detachment.
The clinical outcome detailed in the text is identity fragmentation, or depersonalization. You achieve the goal, you get the public validation and the financial windfall, but you feel entirely disconnected from the achievement.
Because the entity that earned it isn't you, it's the mask.
Precisely.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. The text uses this exact neurological mechanism to radically redefine a buzzword we hear constantly, which is burnout.
Oh yeah, this part is crucial.
If you ask 100 people to define burnout, 99 will talk about volume. They'll say it's pulling an 80-hour week, missing sleep, physical exhaustion from simply doing too many tasks.
The standard cultural definition is entirely focused on physical and mental fatigue resulting from overwork.
But the behavioral science argues that definition is entirely incomplete. Burnout, specifically in the context of the Faustian bargain, is the massive cognitive drain of faking alignment.
It is the sheer, exhausting caloric energy required to operate a false persona.
Think of it like leaving 10 heavy, data-draining applications running in the background of your smartphone. Your battery is going to drop to zero incredibly fast, not because you're actively using the phone to make calls, but because of all that invisible friction happening behind the screen.
The term the researchers use is moral friction. Physical fatigue is easily cured by rest. You run a marathon, your muscles are exhausted, but you feel a sense of accomplishment. You sleep, and you recover.
But moral friction is different.
Yeah, you sit in a climate-controlled office for 8 hours, performing tasks that violate your internal compass, and you go home feeling destroyed. Sleep does not cure moral friction.
Because the executive function drain continues the moment you wake up and have to put the mask back on. That makes the sunk cost trap discussed in the next chapter feel incredibly tragic.
It really does. You are paying this massive biological and neurological tax every single day, so the external reward has to justify the suffering.
Right. You expect the promotion or the bonus to finally make the dissonance go away. You tell yourself, once I secure this title, I won't feel sick about how I got here.
The tragedy is that the reward rarely fills the internal void created by the moral compromise. The dopamine hit from a bonus is transient, but the cortisol drip from cognitive dissonance is chronic.
Yet instead of recognizing the biological rejection and walking away, the psychological need for narrative consistency takes over. The human mind is desperate to believe its suffering had a purpose.
We have to justify the pain, so we double down. We rationalize the trap.
The internal monologue becomes, maybe this level of success wasn't enough to fix the friction, but the next promotion will do it.
The next tax bracket will provide enough security to finally take the mask off. This creates a self-perpetuating feedback loop where the individual compromises further, invests even more energy into the false persona, and just accelerates the depersonalization process.
So, if the neurological danger of playing this game is a literal breakdown of our executive function, how do we navigate the modern world? The sources are very clear that refusing to sell your soul does not mean you are mandated to accept obscurity or poverty.
Right, this isn't a manifesto for moving to a cabin in the woods and abandoning society to maintain your purity.
Exactly.
The text insists on a fundamental shift in operational strategy. You must transition away from a transactional approach, where every boundary is negotiable for the right price, to a structural approach.
And the foundational step of this structural blueprint is a process the behavioral scientists call value auditing.
Value auditing, yes. This is the rigorous exercise of mapping your absolutes.
Yeah.
You cannot protect a boundary that you haven't clearly defined in advance.
If you wait until you are under pressure in a boardroom to figure out where your ethical line is, you will almost always cross it. I love how we can visualize this concept like the architecture of a house. You have to understand the different load-bearing layers of your own identity. We can break this down into 3 distinct tiers: preferences, principles, and non-negotiables.
Okay, I like this analogy.
Think of preferences like the paint colors on the walls of the house. Maybe you prefer working remotely versus commuting, or you prefer a certain management style. These are aesthetic variables.
Right. You can paint the living room blue or green, and it absolutely does not change the structural integrity of the building. Preferences are highly flexible and can be adapted to the market without triggering any cognitive dissonance.
Then you move deeper to the principles. These are the wooden framing of the house, the studs. These are concepts like a commitment to transparency or a drive for operational efficiency.
You strive for them, they give your career its shape and structure, but sometimes a storm hits. Sometimes you have to adjust the framing, reinforce a wall, or compromise on a timeline based on the immediate environment.
But beneath all of that, you have the non-negotiables.
The poured concrete foundation.
Yes, the bedrock. These are the absolute lines that, if crossed, fundamentally destroy your self-respect and trigger that biological threat response we talked about. Actively deceiving consumers. Creating a product you know causes harm. Throwing a colleague under the bus to save your own job.
You can negotiate the paint colors all day long. You can absolutely tweak the wooden framing to get a project across the finish line. But you have to build an impenetrable fortress around that concrete foundation.
Exactly.
Distinguishing between the framing and the foundation brings us to a vital concept for anyone trying to apply this in a highly competitive, high-stakes environment. The sources draw a sharp line between strategic compromise and core capitulation.
Let's be clear, survival in any industry demands adaptation. We are definitely not suggesting you become rigidly dogmatic and impossible to work with over every minor disagreement.
No, that's just a fast track to getting fired, not a path to integrity. Strategic compromise is the necessary adaptation of the surface. It means bending on your methods, adjusting your packaging, or shifting your timelines to make your work viable in the real world.
But core capitulation is altering the fundamental truth, the underlying ethics, or the essential purpose of the work to appease an external demand. That is the definition of selling your soul.
Let's elevate this with a real-world scenario to show the difference. Imagine you are running a software startup. You've built a platform to help people manage their personal finances, and you are pitching venture capitalists.
Okay, tracking.
The investors tell you the market for young professionals is saturated, and they will only fund you if you pivot the marketing to target college students.
Agreeing to that pivot is strategic compromise. You are changing the packaging, the paint color of the house, to secure the resources you need to build the product.
Right. The underlying utility of the product remains intact.
Yeah.
You are simply adapting the delivery mechanism.
Exactly. But imagine those same investors look at your user base and say, we will only give you this funding round if you quietly package and sell your users' private financial data to third-party credit card companies without explicit consent. That's where the real revenue is. Agreeing to that is core capitulation. You are poisoning the concrete foundation. You are taking a tool designed to help people and secretly turning it into a tool that exploits them.
And returning to the neurology, that core capitulation is what sets the amygdala on fire. The key to surviving a high-pressure career without burning out from moral friction is mastering the art of adapting the surface without ever allowing the foundation to be corrupted.
But let's look at the harsh reality of that venture capital scenario. Knowing your boundaries, having that beautifully poured concrete foundation is completely useless if you lack the power to enforce it.
Very true.
If your startup has 2 weeks of runway left and you are desperate to make payroll, that foundation is going to crack under the pressure of the investor's demands. Desperation is the ultimate solvent for integrity.
The sources explicitly identify desperation as the primary catalyst for the Faustian bargain. The greatest threat to your non-negotiables isn't a lack of moral clarity, it is a lack of leverage.
You cannot protect your absolutes if you are operating from a position of profound weakness. So how do we actually build the armor? If the corporate ecosystem is constantly demanding micro-compromises, how do you construct a defense system that allows you to say no to the data selling scheme without losing your livelihood?
The operational blueprint focuses on building two specific pillars of leverage, often colloquially referred to as FU capital. This isn't about dramatic boardroom screaming matches. It's about structural power. The first pillar is skill leverage.
Meaning you become so undeniably, overwhelmingly competent in a highly specific, valuable niche that the market is forced to accommodate your boundaries.
Precisely. When you possess a rare and in-demand skill set, the power dynamic in the room shifts. The employer or the client realizes that replacing you would be more painful than simply respecting your non-negotiables.
They tolerate your refusal to compromise the foundation because they desperately need your ability to build the house. Skill leverage turns you from a disposable commodity into an irreplaceable asset.
The second, and perhaps more crucial pillar, is financial leverage. This is the practice of systematically maintaining low personal overhead and building a substantial financial runway.
Right. If your lifestyle is inflated to the point where you absolutely require your next massive paycheck just to cover your mortgage and car payments, you have zero leverage. Your employer owns your boundaries.
Financial margin is a literal shield against cognitive dissonance. A person with 12 months of living expenses saved breathes completely differently in a negotiation than someone living paycheck to paycheck.
When the boss asks you to massage the quarterly numbers, the ability to say no is directly tied to the knowledge that you can walk away and still feed your family.
Exactly.
So what does this all mean? When you synthesize all of this, understanding the brutal neurological cost of faking it, rigorously auditing your non-negotiables, and doing the hard work to build skill and financial leverage, what is the final directive from our source material?
It boils down to making a conscious choice to opt into the long game.
Because the Faustian bargain is, at its core, a hack. It's an attempted shortcut to bypass the agonizing friction of organic, legitimate growth.
You want the success, the title, and the security right now, so you offer up a piece of your psychological well-being to expedite the process.
By refusing that shortcut, you must inherently recalibrate your timeline. You have to accept that building the career, a business, or an artistic practice that remains completely aligned with your concrete foundation is going to compound much slower at the beginning.
You will watch peers who are willing to wear the mask accelerate past you in the short term.
It is deeply frustrating to watch someone else throw up a cheap, flimsy tent and get praised for building a mansion while you are still painstakingly pouring concrete in the mud. But the architecture of integrity pays off in durability.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that slower, highly aligned organic growth creates an outcome that the texts describe as fundamentally anti-fragile. Anti-fragility goes beyond mere resilience.
A resilient system resists shocks and stays the same, but an anti-fragile system actually grows stronger when exposed to volatility.
When your success isn't built on a precarious stack of micro-compromises, a sudden shift in market trends or the exposure of industry-wide lies cannot bring you down. You become immune to the catastrophic collapse that always eventually follows the Faustian bargain.
Because there is no mask to slip off. There is no fabricated persona to maintain. You actually are the entity you present to the world.
And eliminating that moral friction, freeing your brain from that chronic cortisol drip, is the ultimate form of professional freedom.
Which brings us to a vital question posed by the research, and I want to turn this directly over to you, the listener.
Yeah, this is important to reflect on.
Think critically about your own day-to-day operations. Which specific area of your work or life currently feels the most susceptible to the pressure of making transactional compromises? Where are the microscopic stress fractures starting to form in your airplane wing?
Identifying those fractures early is the only way to reinforce the wing before it snaps. And I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over, building on the neurological reality of burnout we discussed earlier.
Let's hear it.
If individual burnout is actually a biological symptom of moral misalignment and the exhaustion of faking alignment, rather than simply working too many hours, what does that reveal about entire modern industries where burnout is the accepted statistical norm?
Oh, wow.
Consider the implications. Are we looking at sectors of the economy that are simply assigning too many tasks to their workforce? Or are we witnessing the slow, invisible, and systemic collapse of a collective Faustian bargain?
That is a staggering question to walk away with. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Thanks for listening.
Keep your internal compass strong, fiercely protect your concrete foundation, and maintain your financial leverage. We'll see you next time.